At exactly 6:47 in the morning on March 12, 1944, Corporal Thomas Carson crouched in a muddy Italian ditch outside Casino, watching a German armored scout car roll toward his position at 15 miles per hour. He had no anti-tank weapons, no mines, no grenades. Just a piece of rusted barbed wire wrapped around two shovel handles that every officer in the 34th Infantry Division had explicitly forbidden him from using. In the next 90 seconds, that improvised tripwire would either save an entire company or end his military career in disgrace. The SDKF Z2 ground forward through morning fog thick as wet cotton. Tommy could hear its engine whining through the gears, could see the commander's hatch standing open. The German officer probably scanning for American positions everyone knew were here. The wire trembled in his hands, rusted steel singing a quiet note only he could hear. One chance. That was all he had. One chance to prove that a rail yard worker from Gary, Indiana, understood warfare better than West Point engineers. One chance to make the deaths mean something. One chance to keep a promise made to a dying friend in a muddy foxhole 3 weeks ago. The fog clung to the Leary Valley like something alive, cold and damp, smelling of cordite and turned earth and something else Tommy tried not to think about. Bodies decomposed differently in Italian soil than they did back home in Indiana. He knew this now, knew it in ways that would never leave him. He pulled the wire taut and waited. Thomas Carson grew up in a place where steel was religion and survival was earned, not given. Gary, Indiana, in the 1920s and 30s was a city built on blast furnaces and broken backs, a company town where U.S. Steel owned everything that mattered and most things that didn't. His father worked the furnaces, 15-hour shifts in heat that could melt your face off if you got too close, molten iron flowing like angry rivers, the smell of sulfur and coal smoke and human sweat mixing into something that stung your eyes and coated your lungs. A paycheck that barely covered rent and food for 6 kids. Tommy was the middle child, not the oldest who carried responsibility, not the youngest who got attention, just middle, the one people forgot about unless he made noise. So he stopped making noise and started paying attention instead. He spent afternoons at the rail yards when he should have been in school, not because he was stupid or lazy, because the rail yards taught lessons no classroom ever could. Practical lessons, survival lessons, the kind of knowledge that kept you breathing in a world designed to grind you down. He learned which train cars carried what freight, which couplings failed most often, which rails showed stress fractures before they broke, how to rig temporary fixes with whatever scrap metal he could find. Wire and rope and creativity, because the company sure as hell wasn't buying new equipment. The switchman and brakeman knew him, tolerated him, sometimes taught him things, not because they were particularly kind, because they recognized something in the quiet kid who watched everything and forgot nothing. At 8 years old, Tommy watched a coupling pin fail on a freight car loaded with Pennsylvania coal. One moment the cars were moving smooth. The next, metal screaming and cars buckling, and 6 cars derailing in a cascade of destruction that took 90 seconds and caused $40,000 in damage. A brakeman named Patrick Sullivan got caught between 2 cars when they jackknifed. Tommy watched them try to save him, watched them fail. Took 3 hours to get the body out. They had to cut through twisted metal with acetylene torches, while Sullivan's wife stood at the fence screaming her husband's name. Tommy's father found him that evening, sitting alone behind the equipment shed. His father had coal dust in the lines of his face. His hands were scarred from years of burns. His eyes were the color of iron. He sat down next to Tommy without saying anything. They watched the sun set over the rail yards, orange light painting the twisted wreckage gold. Finally, his father spoke. "You see what happened today?" Tommy nodded. "1 loose pin, 1 failure, 6 cars destroyed, 1 man dead." His father's voice was rough from coal dust and cigarettes and years of breathing air no human should breathe. "That's how systems work, boy. One thing breaks, everything breaks. You learn to spot the problems before they become disasters. You understand me?" Tommy understood. "The company says it was Sullivan's fault, says he should have checked the coupling. But I saw that pin last week, told my foreman it was worn. He told me to mind my own business. So Sullivan died because the company didn't want to spend $2 on a new pin." His father looked at Tommy, really looked at him. "You remember this, rules and systems, They're designed by men who don't do the actual work, by men who don't pay the price when things go wrong. Sometimes following the rules gets people killed. Sometimes you have to be smart enough to know when the rules are wrong. Tommy never forgot. By 14, he was apprenticing as a switchman, $5 a week, money his family needed. His father was getting older, lungs showing the first signs of damage from years of coal dust. His mother took in laundry. His younger sister needed shoes. So Tommy went to the rail yard 6 days a week and learned everything the older men could teach him. He learned to read metal fatigue, to hear the sounds that meant trouble coming, to see the patterns in how equipment failed, to fix things with what was available because waiting for proper parts meant delays, and delays meant lost money, and lost money meant lost jobs. You learned to be creative, to improvise, to solve problems with wire and ingenuity instead of proper equipment and engineering degrees. Eddie Novak was Tommy's best friend from the time they were 8 years old, met at the rail yards watching their father's work. Eddie's family was Polish, came over in 1910 with nothing but hope and a willingness to break their bodies for whatever wages America would pay. Eddie's father was a crane operator, good at his job, careful, the kind of man who checked everything twice. But careful doesn't always matter when the equipment is old and the maintenance is deferred and the company values profits over safety. Eddie was 12 when his father died, a coupling failure, different from the one that killed Sullivan but the same in all the ways that mattered. Old equipment, deferred maintenance, company negligence. Tommy was there when they told Eddie, watched his friend's face go blank, watched him process the information like his brain couldn't quite make sense of the words. Your father is dead. The crane cable snapped. It was quick. He didn't suffer. Lies. All lies. Tommy had seen the accident, had seen Eddie's father crushed between the crane arm and a loaded freight car, had heard the screaming. Nothing quick about it. Nothing painless. Eddie's family got nothing. Company said it was operator error. Said Eddie's father should have inspected the cable. Never mind that the cable was 15 years old and should have been replaced a decade ago. Never mind that maintenance logs showed repeated requests for replacement that management ignored. Tommy was 16 then, old enough to understand how the system worked, old enough to be angry about it, old enough to do something. He went to the company with evidence, spent 3 weeks documenting every instance where management had been warned about the cable, every maintenance request that had been denied, every inspection report that showed dangerous wear. He presented it to a company lawyer, a young guy fresh out of law school who still thought justice mattered. The lawyer took it to his bosses. The bosses wanted it buried. But the lawyer threatened to take it to the newspapers, to the unions, to anyone who would listen. The company settled, gave Eddie's family $3,000, enough for 6 months of rent and food, enough to bury Eddie's father properly, not enough to replace a husband and father, but something. Eddie never forgot what Tommy did. We're going to open our own shop someday, Eddie said when they were 17, both working full shifts as switchmen, both knowing they'd probably spend their whole lives in these rail yards unless they found a way out. Carson and Novak Rail Services. We'll do the work right. None of this cutting corners bullshit. Carson and Novak, Tommy agreed. Sounds professional. We'll specialize in safety inspections, coupling repairs, the stuff that actually matters. Keep people alive instead of just keeping the trains running. They shook on it. A promise between friends, a dream to work toward, something better than what their fathers had. When the war came, they enlisted together. January 1943, the recruiting office in downtown Gary, a man in a crisp uniform behind a desk promising training and steady pay and a chance to see the world. Adventure, purpose, something bigger than the rail yards. Eddie signed first, then Tommy. Same day, same oath, same stupid grin thinking they were doing something noble. The recruiter had lied about everything except the seeing the world part. Tommy got 8 weeks of basic training at Fort Benjamin Harrison, a rifle he'd never fired before the Army handed it to him. Endless drills and marching, and men screaming in his face about discipline and following orders. Then a boat to North Africa, then another boat to Italy. By September 1943, he was with the 34th Infantry Division, grinding up the Italian peninsula 1 bloody mile at a time. The 34th fought like they'd been taught. By the book, following doctrine, engaging the enemy according to field manual specifications. Everything proper and authorized and approved by men who'd studied warfare in classrooms and never held a dying friend in a muddy foxhole. Every village was contested. Every ridge had German machine guns dug in. Every river crossing cost lives measured in dozens. But what killed more Americans than frontal assaults or artillery barrages or any conventional combat was something most soldiers never saw coming. German reconnaissance. The SD KFZ-222 was the Wehrmacht's favorite scouting vehicle. 4 wheels, open-topped, armed with a 20mm autocannon and an MG-34 machine gun. Fast enough to escape trouble, armored enough to shrug off rifle fire, light enough to navigate mountain roads the tigers and panthers couldn't use. They appeared at dawn and dusk like ghosts, probing American positions, finding weak points, mapping defensive arrangements. Then they'd vanish before anyone could respond. 12 hours later, German artillery would arrive with coordinates so precise it seemed impossible. Shells landing exactly on command posts, exactly on supply dumps, exactly on concentrations of troops. Precision that could only come from direct observation. American doctrine said to engage reconnaissance vehicles with anti-tank rifles, bazookas, or mines. The problem was simple and infuriating. Nobody had any. The 34th Infantry Division had 9 bazookas for the entire division, 9 weapons for 15,000 men. Anti-tank rifles had been phased out in the 1930s, declared obsolete, removed from the supply chain. Mines were reserved for defensive positions only, not distributed for daily patrols. So soldiers died, again and again. While scout cars did their job and doctrine offered no answer, the deaths started in February 1944. Private First Class Eddie Novak died on the morning of February 18th, a Thursday, cold and overcast with rain threatening from the north. A 222 appeared just after dawn, came down the road moving fast, engine whining, commander scanning from the open hatch, confident, like they owned the ground. Eddie was in a foxhole 40 yards from the road. He saw the scout car, grabbed his M1 Garand, aimed carefully the way they'd taught him in training, fired. The round sparked off armor, bright flash, sound like a hammer on an anvil. The 222 didn't even slow down. The MG-34 traversed, found Eddie, fired 3 rounds. Tommy was in a foxhole 30 yards away, heard the shots, heard Eddie scream, climbed out and ran without thinking. Without caring about the scout car or the bullets or anything except getting to his friend, he dropped into Eddie's foxhole and pulled him close. The blood was hot, soaking through both their uniforms. 3 entry wounds in Eddie's chest, exit wounds in his back the size of fists. Eddie's eyes were wide, confused, like he couldn't understand what his body was telling him. "Tommy," he said. His voice was wet, bubbling, blood in his lungs. "Can't breathe. Why can't I breathe?" "Medic!" Tommy screamed. "I need a medic over here." But the medic was 200 yards away, and Eddie didn't have 2 minutes. Tommy held pressure on the wounds, felt blood pulsing between his fingers, warm and thick and utterly unstoppable. Eddie's life draining out and nothing Tommy could do to stop it. "The shop," Eddie said, whispering now, getting quieter. "You gotta, Carson and Novak. You gotta open it. Don't talk. Save your strength. Medic's coming." "Liar," Eddie smiled, bloody teeth. "You always were a bad liar." Eddie coughed. More blood. His grip on Tommy's arm was getting weaker. "You said, week ago, said wire, could work, against the cars." His eyes found Tommy's, held them. "You were, right, should've, broken the rules, should've. Eddie, please, promise me." Eddie's voice was barely audible now, fading like smoke. "No more, following orders, that kill, your brothers, promise, I promise." Eddie died holding Tommy's hand. Tommy sat there in that foxhole for 11 minutes, holding Eddie's body, watching the blood cool and congeal, listening to the sounds of war continue around him like nothing had happened. Like the universe gave a damn that the best person Tommy had ever known was dead at 20 years old. When he finally climbed out, something had broken inside him. Or maybe broken was the wrong word. Maybe something had crystallized, hardened, transformed from soft doubt into sharp certainty. Never again. Never again would he follow orders that killed his brothers. Never again would he wait for permission while good men died. Never again would he let doctrine trump common sense. Eddie had been right. Tommy had proposed the tripwire idea a week before, had gone to Captain Hayes with a plan. Simple, cheap, effective. Wires stretched across the roads at axle height to catch scout cars. Hayes had said no, against regulations, violated field manual specifications for obstacle emplacement, unauthorized and dangerous. And Eddie died because Tommy had obeyed. Sergeant Marcus Riley died 5 days later on February 23rd, another 222, another dawn patrol. Riley tried to hit it with a grenade from 30 yards. Missed high. The autocannon found him, cut him in half. Riley was from Brooklyn, 24 years old. 4 sisters back home who wrote him letters every week. He taught Tommy how to set up a proper fighting position, how to read terrain for dead ground and firing lanes, how to keep your feet dry in Italian mud by changing socks 3 times a day. His mother got the telegram on March the 2nd. Corporal Luis Santos died on March 4th, from El Paso, Texas. Spoke better Spanish than English, always shared his cigarettes even when he only had 3 left. A 222 drove through the company position at dusk, machine gun blazing. Santos was running for cover when the autocannon caught him in the back. The medic couldn't stop the bleeding. Tommy held Santos while he died, listened to him calling for his mother in Spanish, watched the light go out of his eyes. By early March 1944, the 34th Infantry Division had lost 47 men to reconnaissance vehicle attacks in 6 weeks. 47 names. 47 families getting telegrams. 47 bodies buried in Italian soil. Not from battles, not from heroic last stands. Just scout cars doing their job while Americans stood helpless. Tommy knew 3 of them personally. Eddie, Riley, Santos. Could recite their service numbers. Could describe exactly how they died. Could close his eyes and see their faces perfectly. Each death felt preventable. Each death made him angrier. The official response from battalion was predictable and useless. Maintain defensive posture. Conserve anti-tank assets. Await resupply. As if waiting would bring back the dead. Captain William Hayes held a meeting after Santos died, March 5, 1944. 20 exhausted soldiers in a barn that smelled like gunpowder and wet wool. Hayes had arrived from division headquarters that morning. His uniform was clean, pressed, boots shined, like he'd never crawled through Italian mud or held a dying friend. Higher command is aware of the reconnaissance problem, Hayes said. He stood at the front like a professor lecturing students. New bazooka shipments are expected within the month. Until then, maintain discipline and follow engagement protocols. Tommy stood in the back. He'd been thinking about the problem for weeks. Couldn't stop thinking about it. The rail yards had taught him that when proper equipment wasn't available, you improvised with what you had. The scout cars used the same roads, moved fast but predictably, had one vulnerability nobody was exploiting: their wheels. "Sir," Tommy said. 20 heads turned. Hayes looked at him with the expression of a man interrupted during an important speech. "What is it, Corporal?" "What if we rigged wire across the roads, low height, taut enough to catch the front axles? Stop the cars before they can get close." The barn went quiet, men looking at each other, some nodding, thinking it through, seeing the logic. Hayes looked at Tommy like he'd suggested something obscene. "Corporal Carson," Hayes said slowly, carefully, like explaining something to a child. "The field manual is very clear on authorized anti-vehicle obstacles. Wire entanglements are defensive measures requiring specific positioning, supporting fires, and engineering oversight. They are not improvised booby traps set up by individual soldiers." "But sir, if we just stretched wire at the right height, the scout cars would hit it at speed and flip." "Simple physics. We wouldn't need bazookas or mines, just wire and shovels." "The answer is no." Hayes's voice went hard, sharp, the voice of authority not accustomed to being questioned. "We are not setting random tripwires across roads that could injure our own men or violate the laws of warfare. We will wait for proper equipment and engage enemy reconnaissance according to approved doctrine." Is that clear? Yes, sir. Dismissed. Tommy said nothing more. But he didn't forget. The scout cars kept coming. More men kept dying. 2 more killed on March 8th. Another on March 9th. The approved methods required equipment they didn't have. The unauthorized method required wire, shovels, and a willingness to risk everything. On the night of March 10th, 1944, Tommy made his decision. Another 222 had killed 2 men that afternoon, Privates Chen and Harrison. Chen was a radio operator from San Francisco. 21 years old, always homesick, talked about Chinatown restaurants like they served food from heaven. Harrison was from Oklahoma, farm kid, talked constantly about his land, about spring planting, about getting back to work that actually mattered instead of this killing. Both dead because a scout car rolled through at 4 in the afternoon and nobody could stop it. Tommy lay in his foxhole that night staring at stars, different constellations than he'd grown up with in Indiana, foreign sky, like even the heavens were telling him he didn't belong here. He thought about Eddie, about Eddie's last words, about the promise he'd made while holding his dying friend. He thought about Riley and Santos and Chen and Harrison, about the growing list of names, about how many more would die if nothing changed. He thought about Captain Hayes saying no, about doctrine written by men who'd never watched good people bleed out in the mud, about rules that protected institutions instead of soldiers. And he made a choice. At midnight, Tommy moved through camp like a ghost, grabbed a coil of barbed wire from the supply dump, 30 feet, rusted but strong, took 2 entrenching tools, the standard issue folding shovels every soldier carried, slipped through the perimeter without telling anyone. No permission, no backup, no witnesses. The March night was cold, temperature maybe 45 degrees. The mud sucked at his boots with every step. Thick Italian mud that grabbed and held and made every movement twice as hard. He could hear artillery rumbling to the north, constant, distant, like permanent thunder. The dirt road ran parallel to Allied lines about 400 yards out. German positions visible on the ridge to the north. The scout cars used this road regularly. Predictable route, tree cover, perfect for reconnaissance. Also perfect for an ambush if you were willing to get close enough. Tommy found a spot where the road narrowed between 2 oak trees. Good visibility from American lines. Limited visibility from the German side until you were on top of it. He drove the first shovel into the ground on the left side, angled it back toward friendly positions. The blade sank 6 inches into mud. Not deep enough. Tommy used a rock to hammer it deeper. 12 inches. Stable enough to hold tension. The second shovel went in on the right side. Tommy paced the distance, 18 feet across, wide enough that a scout car couldn't avoid it without leaving the road. Then came the wire. He wrapped it around the first shovel handle. 3 loops, tight as physics allowed. His hands were slick with mud and rust. The wire bit into his palms. He could feel it cutting skin, feel blood mixing with cold and wet. Ignored the pain. He stretched the wire across the road, exactly 14 inches off the ground. Not ankle height, not waist height. Axle height. 2 weeks earlier, Tommy had measured a destroyed 222 during a patrol. Front axle sat 13 to 15 inches depending on load. The wire had to catch it at speed, had to hold long enough to stop forward momentum, had to be strong enough not to snap but tensioned right so it didn't break. He wrapped the other end around the second shovel, 3 loops matching the first, tested the tension by pulling hard. The wire hummed. Musical note. The shovels held firm. Too loose and the wire would snap on impact. Too tight and it would break before the axle caught. Had to be exactly right. Tommy adjusted, tightened fractionally, tested again. The wire sang when he plucked it. Perfect tension, like a guitar string tuned precisely. The whole setup took 23 minutes. He sat in the ditch afterward, catching his breath, watching the empty road, listening to the night. If a German patrol came now, he was dead. If an American officer found out, court-martial. If the wire worked, maybe fewer men would die like Eddie and Riley and Santos. Simple calculation, risk versus reward. Math learned in the rail yards where one decision could mean the difference between going home and going to the hospital. Tommy buried the wire under a thin layer of mud, just enough to make it invisible in low light. Not enough to weaken it or change the tension. The shovels already looked abandoned, rusted, forgotten. Someone would have to look directly at them to notice anything unusual. And by the time they looked, it would be too late. He crawled back toward American lines at 1:15 in the morning, took the long way around, staying low, moving slow. Every sound amplified in the darkness, every snap of a twig like a gunshot. He didn't tell anyone what he'd done. Couldn't. Hayes had been explicit. This was unauthorized, violated doctrine, exactly the kind of initiative that got you court-martialed even if it saved lives. Tommy reached his foxhole and lay down in the cold mud. The wire was out there, taut and invisible, waiting for dawn, waiting for a target, and so was Tommy. Sleep wouldn't come. He lay there staring at the stars, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The rail yards, his father's lessons, Sullivan dying, Eddie's father dying, the promise of Carson and Novak rail services, enlisting together, coming to this God-forsaken country, Eddie dying in his arms. You should have broken the rules. Tommy closed his eyes, not to sleep, just to rest them. I'm breaking them now, Eddie, he whispered to the darkness, to the stars, to his dead friend. I'm sorry I was too late for you, but I won't be too late again. The words hung in the cold air. No one heard them. No one answered. But Tommy felt something settle inside his chest, some weight accepting its new shape, some burden that had been crushing him finding a way to distribute itself differently. He'd spent 19 years following rules, doing what he was told, trusting that people in authority knew better than a rail yard worker from Gary, Indiana. But Eddie was dead. Riley was dead. Santos was dead. Chen and Harrison were dead, and the rules had killed them all. Tommy opened his eyes. Different stars, foreign sky, but the same promise burning in his chest like a coal that would never go cold. No more following orders that killed his brothers. No more waiting for permission. No more trusting doctrine over common sense and human lives. From this moment forward, Thomas Carson would do what worked, what saved lives, what honored the dead by keeping the living alive, even if it meant court-martial, even if it meant disgrace, even if it meant standing alone against every officer in the division. The wire was out there waiting, and tomorrow morning would bring the test. Either it would work or it wouldn't. Either Tommy would prove that a rail yard education beat a West Point degree, or he'd prove that breaking the rules got you nothing but punishment. But at least he'd done something. At least he'd tried. At least he'd kept his promise to Eddie, and that had to be enough. The scout car appeared at 6:43 in the morning on March 12, 1944. Tommy was on watch, eating cold rations from a tin that tasted like metal and regret. The morning fog was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then he heard it, that distinctive whine of a German straight-six engine. Unmistakable, unforgettable, SD KFZ 222 coming from the north. Tommy set down his tin, didn't move, didn't call out. Nobody else had heard it yet. The sound was still distant, still soft. But Tommy's ears had been trained in rail yards where hearing the wrong sound at the wrong time could kill you. He knew machinery, knew engines, knew exactly what was coming. The vehicle emerged from the fog at 600 yards, gray paint, low profile, commander's hatch open, moving at what Tommy estimated was 15 miles per hour. Routine patrol. They weren't expecting contact, weren't expecting anything except another boring morning, watching Americans who had no way to hurt them. 500 yards now. Tommy could see the commander clearly. Young guy, maybe 25, scanning with binoculars, methodical sweeps left to right. The gunner was traversing the 20mm autocannon, probably out of boredom more than caution. They'd done this run 100 times, never took fire, never saw anything worth reporting. 400 yards. The car stayed on the road. Perfect. Exactly where Tommy needed it. 300 yards. Tommy's hands started shaking, not from fear, from anticipation, from the weight of what was about to happen. This either worked or it didn't. If it didn't, the scout car would find them and call in artillery. If it did, he'd violated direct orders and there would be consequences. He didn't care about the consequences, only cared about whether Eddie's death would mean something, whether the wire would hold, whether physics and tension and a rail yard education could beat German engineering. 200 yards. Tommy could see the front wheels now, mud-caked, spinning fast. The 222 accelerated slightly, probably wanting to clear the area quickly. Get back to base. Hot coffee and breakfast. Another day survived in a war that seemed to go on forever. 50 yards from the wire. Tommy held his breath. The wire caught the front right wheel at exactly 6:47 in the morning. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The wheel locked. The axle seized. But the car's momentum was enormous. 15 miles per hour translated to 22 feet per second. 3,000 pounds of German armor moving fast with nowhere to go. Physics took over. The locked wheel became a pivot point. The entire vehicle's weight shifted forward and sideways simultaneously. The nose went down first, digging into the road, throwing up a spray of mud and gravel. Then the rear lifted, gravity and momentum fighting each other. The car went vertical. The commander had maybe half a second to realize what was happening. His mouth opened. No sound came out, just shock, pure incomprehension. Then the car was tumbling. It rolled once. The commander thrown clear, his body arcing through the air like a rag doll, landing 30 feet away in a wet crunch. The car rolled twice, metal screaming, glass shattering, the autocannon tearing loose from its mount. The turret crushing inward as 3,000 pounds of armor compressed itself against Italian earth. It rolled 3 times, each rotation slower than the last. Momentum bleeding away, finally stopping upside down, wheels spinning uselessly in the air, engine still running, smoke pouring from the crushed engine compartment. The silence afterward was profound. Tommy was already moving, grabbed his M1 Garand, ran toward the wreck yelling for covering fire. Other soldiers poured out of their positions, rifles up, ready for a fight that wasn't coming. The commander was dead. Neck broken during the second roll, his body twisted at angles that made Tommy's stomach turn. Young guy. Couldn't have been more than 23. Wedding ring on his finger, photograph tucked in his jacket pocket. The gunner was trapped under the turret, unconscious. Bleeding from the ears. Probably wouldn't make it. Internal injuries. Crushed ribs. Tommy had seen enough rail yard accidents to recognize trauma that deep. The driver was crawling out through the shattered windscreen, dazed but alive. Maybe 22 years old. Blonde hair matted with blood. He looked up at Tommy with eyes that held no fight. Just confusion. Just fear. Just a kid who wanted to go home. Tommy pulled him clear, passed him to Private Danny Foster, who'd reached the wreck right behind him. Then Tommy saw the wire, still attached to the front axle, still wrapped around the rusted shovel handles. The shovels had been pulled from the ground, dragged 20 feet, but the wire had held, exactly as planned, exactly as the math said it would. Tommy moved fast, unwrapped the wire from the axle, coiled it quickly, shoved it in his pack before anyone could see clearly what had stopped the car. The shovels went in too, evidence disappearing, method concealed, but the German driver had seen it, had felt the sudden stop, had seen the wire stretched across the road in that half second before impact. His eyes met Tommy's. Recognition there. Understanding. He knew what had happened, knew exactly what had killed his commander and destroyed his vehicle. Tommy held his gaze for a moment, then turned away. Captain William Hayes arrived 6 minutes later, boots splashing through mud, uniform somehow still clean despite the chaos. He looked at the overturned scout car, then at Tommy, eyes narrowing. "What happened, Corporal?" "It flipped, sir. Must have hit something in the road." Hayes walked around the wreck, slowly, methodically, looking for mines. For bazooka damage, for rocket strikes, for something that made sense according to the doctrine he'd studied at West Point. He found nothing. The car was intact except for the roll damage. No penetrations, no blast marks, no burned paint, no evidence of explosive weapons. Just one very destroyed scout car that had simply flipped for no apparent reason. Hayes stopped walking, looked at the ground, at the road, at the tire marks. He was smart, West Point educated, trained to analyze battlefield evidence. Tommy watched him think it through, watched him process, watched the moment Hayes realized something was wrong with the official story. "Corporal Carson," Hayes said quietly, "scout cars don't just flip." "Yes, sir." Hayes stared at him, really stared, like he could see through the words to the truth underneath. Like he knew Tommy was lying but couldn't prove it, couldn't figure out how it had been done. The German prisoner was secured. The car was documented. Nobody was dead on the American side. Hayes could push this, could investigate, could make it a problem. But he didn't. "Get this vehicle documented," Hayes said finally. "I want photographs and a full report on my desk by 1600 hours." "Yes, sir." Hayes walked away. But Tommy saw him glance back, saw the suspicion, saw the wheels turning. Hayes wasn't stupid. He knew something had happened, just didn't know what. By noon, every soldier in the company knew something was wrong with the official story. Scout cars didn't flip themselves. Physics didn't work that way. There had to be a reason, an explanation. But Tommy wasn't talking, and nobody else had seen what happened. Private Danny Foster found Tommy at 2 in the afternoon. Tommy was cleaning his rifle. Methodical, thorough, keeping his hands busy so his mind didn't wander. "What really happened out there?" Foster asked. Tommy didn't look up. Car flipped. "Tommy, I saw wire in your pack. I saw the shovels." Tommy stopped cleaning, looked at Foster, really looked at him. Danny Foster was from Gary, too. South Side, Polish neighborhood. They'd known each other since basic, had shipped to Italy on the same transport, had shared foxholes and rations in the particular misery of Italian winter. If anyone would understand, it was Foster. "You didn't see anything," Tommy said quietly. Foster sat down. "If I did see something, hypothetically, would it work again?" "Yes." "Can you teach me?" Tommy looked around, making sure no officers were in earshot, making sure this conversation stayed private. "You understand what you're asking?" "Hayes forbade this. Direct order. If we get caught, it's court-martial. Dishonorable discharge. Maybe prison." "I understand. Why? Why risk it?" Foster's face went hard. "Because I'm tired of watching scout cars kill my friends. Because doctrine isn't working. Because somebody needs to do something, even if it's against the rules." Tommy recognized that look, had seen it in his own mirror. The look of someone who decided that following orders wasn't worth the cost anymore. "Tonight," Tommy said, "after dark, different section of road. I'll show you once. After that, you're on your own." That night, after the officers had gone to sleep and the camp had settled into uneasy quiet, Tommy took Foster to a road 300 yards north. Different location. Different trees, same basic geography. He showed Foster everything. How to measure the distance, how to drive the shovels deep enough to hold tension, how to wrap the wire, how to calculate the exact height, how to test the tension without making noise, how to bury it just enough to hide it, but not enough to weaken it. Foster did it himself while Tommy watched. Made mistakes, corrected them, asked questions, learned fast. "Don't tell anyone unless you trust them completely," Tommy said when Foster finished. "This spreads wrong. We all hang." Foster nodded. "I know someone who needs to know. Someone who lost his brother to a scout car last week. Your call, your risk, but make damn sure." Within 48 hours, 6 soldiers knew the method. Tommy hadn't told them. Foster had told Private Jackson. Jackson had told Private O'Malley. O'Malley had told Corporal Williams. Word spread through the underground network that existed in every military unit. The whispered conversations that happened after officers went to sleep. The informal chain of trust that connected men who did the actual fighting. By March 15th, installations were going up across the sector. Jackson rigged one on the road to San Pietro. O'Malley set one up near the Garigliano River. Williams put one across a trail the Germans used for night patrols. None of them had permission. None of them documented it. They just did it. The second SD KFZ 222 hit Jackson's wire on March 18th. Same result. The car flipped, commander killed, crew injured. Jackson removed the wire before anyone investigated. The third car hit O'Malley's trap on March 21st. Didn't flip completely, but crashed hard enough to disable it. The crew abandoned the vehicle and ran, left it burning in the middle of the road. By March 25th, German reconnaissance in the 34th Division sector had dropped by 60%. The 222s were still probing, still trying, but they were moving slower now, taking different routes, showing more caution, something had changed, and they didn't know what. Lieutenant Franz Weber commanded a reconnaissance platoon in the 29th Panzer Grenadier Division, 3 SDKFZ 222s, experienced crews. He'd been running patrols in the casino sector since January, knew the roads, knew the American positions, knew how to avoid trouble and get his men home alive. In the past 2 weeks, he'd lost 3 scout cars in circumstances that made no sense. On March 27th, Weber examined the latest wreckage personally. SDKFZ 222, number 237. Flipped on the road to Cervaro, commander dead, gunner wounded. Driver claimed the car had suddenly stopped at speed, just locked up and tumbled. Weber crawled under the wreckage. The front axle was bent but intact. No mine damage. No explosive residue. But there were scrapes on the wheel housing, deep gouges. Something had caught the axle at high speed. Something thin and strong. He found a fragment embedded in the wheel well. Rusted barbed wire, standard issue. Could have been German or American, but the placement was deliberate. Someone had strung it across the road at exactly the right height to catch a scout car's front axle. Weber reported his findings to Division Intelligence on March 29th. The intelligence officer was skeptical. Barbed wire wouldn't stop a light armored car. The weight and momentum are too great. 3 cars, sir, same pattern, all unexplained until you consider wire. Do you have proof? I have a fragment. I have scrape marks. I have 3 destroyed vehicles and no other explanation. The intelligence officer took the report, filed it, probably never read it again. But Weber's superiors took it seriously. By early April, standing orders went out. Scout car crews were to scan roads for wire obstacles before proceeding. Move at half speed. Commanders should dismount to inspect suspicious terrain. The cautious approach cut reconnaissance effectiveness by 40%, and the American tripwires stopped working. The Germans had figured out the trick. Now they moved too slowly, watched too carefully. The wires were still there, still taut, still perfectly positioned, but scout cars crept past them at walking speed. Slow enough to see the shovels, slow enough to stop. By March 30th, no more German vehicles were hitting the wires. The method had worked perfectly, for exactly 18 days, long enough to prove the concept, not long enough to win the war. Tommy sat in his foxhole on April 2nd, watching a scout car creep past at 5 miles per hour. The commander was out of the vehicle, walking ahead, checking the road visually. When he reached the wire Tommy had installed 3 days earlier, he stopped, bent down, examined the shovels. Then he smiled, waved his driver forward. The 222 rolled slowly over the wire. Careful, controlled. The axle cleared with inches to spare. The Germans had adapted, and Tommy's innovation was obsolete. Captain Hayes discovered the truth on April 3rd. He was inspecting defensive positions when he found Private Williams setting up a wire across a logging road. Same configuration Tommy had used. 2 shovels, barbed wire at axle height. Williams froze when he saw the captain. Hayes walked over, tested the wire tension himself. His face was unreadable. "Where did you learn this, Private?" Williams said nothing. "That's an order." "Corporal Carson, sir." Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he took out his notebook, sketched the setup, measurements, angles, wire type. Asked Williams to demonstrate the installation process while he watched. Took more notes. "How many have you set up?" "4, sir." "Results?" "1 hit. Scout car flipped. German crew captured." Hayes closed his notebook, looked down the empty road. Artillery rumbled in the distance. The war continued. Men continued dying. And here was a method that worked, that required no special equipment, that ordinary soldiers could implement, that had been explicitly forbidden. Hayes could end this, could arrest everyone involved, could make it a disciplinary issue that destroyed careers and reputations, or he could make a different choice. "Show me 2 more setups before dark," Hayes said. "Different terrain. I want to see placement options." Williams blinked. "Sir?" "That's an order, Private." Hayes had made his decision, not to punish, to enable, to choose results over regulations, to become part of the solution instead of part of the problem. By April 10th, Hayes had documented 17 separate wire installations across the company sector, interviewed the soldiers who set them up, recorded the results, calculated the success rate. 87% of scout cars that hit the wires were disabled. 0 friendly casualties. Material cost was 30 feet of barbed wire and 2 shovels. Equipment already in the supply chain. Hayes wrote a report. 3 pages. Technical specifications, tactical recommendations, statistical validation. He sent it to battalion on April 12th. The response came back on April 19th. Short, direct, unambiguous. Method unauthorized. Discontinue immediately. Violates field manual regulations regarding obstacle emplacement. Fails to meet engineering safety standards. Hayes read the response twice. Then he filed it in his desk. Did nothing. The tripwires stayed up. The casualty rate stayed down. And officially, nothing was happening. But Tommy had a problem. The wires no longer worked. The Germans were too cautious. And American casualties from reconnaissance were climbing again. Not as high as before, but high enough. He needed to prove the wires still mattered. Needed to make the Germans fear them again. Needed to restore the psychological advantage. There was one road that would do it. The most exposed stretch between German and American lines. Heavy patrol activity on both sides, visible from multiple positions. To install a wire, there would require working in potential line of sight, would require absolute precision, would require luck Tommy wasn't sure he had. Private Foster found him on the night of April 8th. Don't do this, Tommy. It's suicide. The wires stopped working. Germans got smart. We need to remind them why they should be afraid. Not worth your life. Eddie died because I hesitated. I won't hesitate again. Eddie wouldn't want you dead either. Tommy looked at his friend. Then I better not die. At 2 in the morning on April 9th, Tommy crawled toward the exposed road. Every nerve screaming danger. Every instinct saying turn back. But he kept moving. German patrol passed 50 yards away. Tommy froze in open ground. No cover, no concealment. Just him and the mud and 18 minutes of absolute terror while boots crunched past and voices spoke German he couldn't understand. He reached the road at 3:15, started driving the first shovel. Quiet, careful, every sound amplified in the darkness. German voices again. Patrol returning early. Tommy dropped flat, shovel half installed. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe. A German soldier stopped 8 feet away, lit a cigarette. The match flared. Tommy could see his face. Young, tired, human. 5 minutes. The soldier stood there smoking. Tommy's lungs burned, his heart hammered. Every second an eternity. Finally the soldier finished, flicked the cigarette away, walked on. Tommy completed the installation at 3:47, hands shaking so badly he could barely tie the wire. Crawled back, took 90 minutes, should have taken 15, reached American lines at 5:20 and collapsed in his foxhole, body shutting down from stress. At 11:30 that morning, an SD-KFZ 202 hit Tommy's wire, flipped spectacularly in full view of both German and American positions. Commander thrown clear, landed dead, gunner trapped, vehicle burning. The German response was immediate panic. If there were wires on that road, there could be wires everywhere. Reconnaissance pulled back entirely for 3 days. When they returned, they moved at a crawl. Maximum caution. Tommy had done it, restored the fear, proven the method still worked. But his body was wrecked. His nerves were shot. And Captain Hayes was looking at him with an expression that said everything and nothing. The wire war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The numbers told a story that battalion headquarters couldn't ignore forever. February 1944, before the tripwires began, the 34th Infantry Division lost 47 men to reconnaissance vehicle attacks. 47 telegrams sent to families. 47 bodies buried in Italian soil. March 1944, after the wires spread through the sector, 12 men killed, a 74% reduction in casualties. April 1944, 3 men killed, 94% reduction. Reconnaissance vehicle sightings followed the same pattern. February, 147 sightings. March, 89. April, 34. The scout cars were still out there, still probing, but they were cautious now, slow, afraid. Artillery strikes called in by German reconnaissance told the clearest story. February 203 strikes, March 127, April 58. Without accurate observation, German artillery was firing blind, wasting ammunition on empty ground instead of concentrations of American troops. Someone in division staff noticed. Colonel Matthew Sherman was the division intelligence officer, career Army, 38 years old, graduate of the War College. The kind of officer who read reports other people ignored, who noticed patterns other people missed. He pulled the casualty reports in late April, saw the numbers, saw the correlation. Something had changed in early March, something dramatic, something that wasn't in any official documentation. Sherman sent investigators to the front lines on April 25th. They found the tripwires within 2 days. On April 28th, Captain Hayes was summoned to division headquarters. He reported expecting disciplinary action. Found Sherman sitting behind a desk covered in reports and maps and statistical analyses. "Captain Hayes," Sherman said without preamble, "explain these unauthorized obstacles in your sector." Hayes stood at attention. "Sir, I can explain the method or I can explain the results. Which matters more?" Sherman looked at him. Really looked, not with anger, with calculation. With the kind of pragmatic assessment that separated good officers from political ones. "Show me the statistics again." Hayes laid out everything. 17 documented wire installations, 87% success rate against scout cars, 0 friendly casualties, material cost negligible, technical requirements minimal, could be taught to ordinary soldiers in one night. Sherman studied the numbers for a long time. Finally, he looked up. "This violates doctrine?" "Yes, sir." "It violates engineering safety protocols?" "Yes, sir." "It was implemented without authorization from anyone above company level?" "Yes, sir." Sherman leaned back in his chair. "It also saved somewhere between 50 and 70 American lives in 6 weeks. Conservative estimate." Hayes said nothing. "I can't officially approve a method that violates field manual specifications," Sherman said, "but I can't ignore results either. So here's what's going to happen. Nothing." "Sir?" "No orders to stop, no orders to continue, no official documentation, no formal approval, just a memo that gets filed and forgotten and a blind eye turned toward your sector." Sherman met Hayes's gaze. "I never saw anything. You never told me anything. Men stopped dying. That's all either of us knows. Understood?" "Understood, sir." But Sherman wasn't done. "There's one more thing. The 36th Infantry Division is taking over this sector next month. They need to know how to deal with reconnaissance. The official anti-tank school takes 3 weeks and requires equipment we don't have. I need someone who can teach a faster method." Hayes understood where this was going. "Corporal Carson, sir." "Is he reliable?" "He's the one who invented it." "Then I want him on a training detail. 2 weeks in June. Teach the method to scout and sniper teams from 36th Division. We'll call it improvised obstacle emplacement in the paperwork. Nobody needs to know exactly what that means." On May 23rd, Tommy was called to division headquarters. He reported in his cleanest uniform, which still looked like it had been through a war because it had. Expected punishment. Expected consequences for all the rules he'd broken. Found Colonel Sherman instead. "Corporal Carson," Sherman said, "I've read the reports about your wire method." Tommy stood at attention. "Sir, I can explain. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to ask you to train others." Tommy blinked. Didn't expect that. Didn't expect anything except court-martial and possibly prison. Sherman explained. The 36th Division needed the knowledge. Official channels too slow. Carson's method could be taught in days instead of weeks. Could save lives immediately instead of eventually. "I can't make it official," Sherman said, "but I can assign you to a training detail. You teach the method. We document it as obstacle emplacement training. Everyone's happy." Tommy found his voice. "On one condition, sir." Sherman raised an eyebrow. Corporals didn't usually negotiate with colonels. "It gets named after Private Eddie Novak. He died because I didn't break the rules fast enough. He deserves the credit." Sherman considered this, nodded. "The Novak method, fair enough. Report to Training Area 6 tomorrow at 0600. June 1944. 2 weeks that felt like 2 months. Tommy taught 60 soldiers everything he knew. Placement, tension, concealment. Removal. Every detail learned through trial and error and nearly getting killed. The soldiers were skeptical at first. Wire wouldn't stop armor. Basic physics said so. But Tommy showed them photographs of flipped scout cars, gave them the casualty statistics, explained the math. By the end of the first week, they were believers. By the end of the second week, they were installing wires faster than Tommy could. The method spread. July, 3 divisions using it. August, across the entire Italian front. Never officially documented, never in training manuals. Just whispered knowledge passing from unit to unit, soldier to soldier. The underground network that existed in every army. In Germany, Lieutenant Franz Weber submitted his final report on American tripwire tactics in July 1944. Comprehensive analysis, tactical recommendations, statistical evidence. American improvised anti-vehicle obstacles represent fundamental shift in reconnaissance doctrine, he wrote. Current countermeasures reduce effectiveness by 70%. Recommend full tactical revision or accept that reconnaissance role is severely limited in this theater. Wehrmacht High Command response was predictable. Maintain current protocols. Reconnaissance losses acceptable given strategic importance. Translation. We can't admit that American improvisation defeated German engineering. Weber made a final entry in his personal diary on July 15th. We know who invented this method. Captured Americans mentioned Carson and the Novak method. A single corporal defeated our entire reconnaissance doctrine with wire and shovels. If Germany loses this war, it won't be for lack of equipment. It will be because we couldn't adapt the way they can. Conservative estimates for March through August 1944 credited the Novak method with destroying or disabling 43 German reconnaissance vehicles. Those vehicles would have called in hundreds of artillery strikes. Those strikes would have killed hundreds of soldiers. Lives saved, somewhere between 300 and 400 American soldiers who went home instead of dying in Italian mud. Tommy never saw those numbers, never knew the full impact, only knew that scout cars stopped killing his friends at the rate they had before. On August 12, 1944, Tommy received transfer orders, returned to 34th Division, standard rotation, no commendation, no medal, no official recognition, just orders on paper sending him back to the unit he'd started with. He met with Colonel Sherman one last time before leaving. "Sir, I thought there'd be something, some kind of acknowledgement." Sherman sighed, looked tired, like the war had aged him a decade in 6 months. "Corporal, you want the truth? Your method saved hundreds of lives. It's now official doctrine being taught across 3 armies. But if we give you a medal, we have to explain what for. And if we explain what for, we have to admit 3 things." Sherman counted on his fingers. 1. West Point engineers missed what a rail yard worker figured out in a week. 2. We almost court-martialed the man who solved our biggest tactical problem. 3. The field manual was wrong, and a 19-year-old corporal was right. Sherman leaned forward. There are officers who would resent you for that. Career men who spent 20 years studying tactics. You made them look incompetent with 30 feet of wire and 2 shovels. Tommy understood. So I get nothing. I can give you recognition and make you a target for every insecure officer in the division. Or I can keep you anonymous and keep you safe. Your choice, Corporal. Tommy thought about Eddie, about Riley and Santos, about the growing list of names who'd never gotten recognition either, who'd died doing their jobs with no medals and no parades. "I didn't do it for medals, sir. I did it so fewer men would die like my friends." "I know, but think about your future, about after the war. Do you want to be the corporal who embarrassed the brass? Or do you want to go home and live your life?" Tommy thought about Carson and Novak rail services, about the shop he'd promised to open, about the life waiting for him back in Gary. "Keep it anonymous, sir. The method matters more than my name." Sherman extended his hand. "You're a better man than most, Carson. The Army doesn't deserve you." November 1945, Germany defeated, Italy liberated, war over. Tommy was discharged with the rank of sergeant and a combat infantryman badge. No medals for the tripwires, no recognition beyond what his fellow soldiers gave him, which was all he'd wanted anyway. January 1946. Tommy returned to Gary, Indiana. U.S. Steel hired him as a switchman. Same rail yards he'd worked before the war. Same couplers and cables and the particular rhythm of trains that had defined his childhood. But everything felt different now. The work was the same. The place was the same. But Tommy had changed in ways that couldn't be measured or explained. He used his savings to buy a small garage on the east side. 2 bays. Enough room for equipment, enough space to make a living. He painted a sign himself. Careful letters. Professional looking. Carson and Novak Rail Services below it. Smaller. In memory of Private Eddie Novak, 34th Infantry Division. The shop specialized in coupling repairs and safety inspections. The work that actually mattered. The work that kept people alive instead of just keeping the trains running. Every time Tommy fixed a coupling, he thought about Eddie's father, about Sullivan, about all the men who died because companies cut corners and regulations weren't enforced. He never cut corners, never deferred maintenance, never told a customer something was safe when it wasn't. Cost him business sometimes, cost him money, but he slept better. In 1947, Tommy married Dorothy from East Chicago. She worked at the diner on Main Street, had kind eyes and asked no questions about Italy. Seemed to understand that some things couldn't be talked about, that some weights had to be carried silently. They had 3 children over the next decade, 2 boys and a girl. Good kids, smart kids. None of them went to war. Tommy never talked much about Italy. When asked, he'd say he did his job and came home. Wouldn't elaborate, wouldn't share details. Dorothy learned not to push, but every year on March 12th, the phone would ring. Danny Foster calling from Arizona where he'd moved after the war. Opened a hardware store. Married. Had grandchildren now. They'd talk for maybe 10 minutes. Never about the war directly, just checking in, making sure they were both still alive, still okay, still managing. "You still having the dreams?" Foster asked one year. "Sometimes," Tommy admitted. "You?" "Yeah, the scout car, the wire, the German kid's face when we pulled him out." "Me too." They'd hang up and go back to their lives, back to being normal, back to pretending the war was something that happened to someone else a long time ago. In 1963, Tommy had an unexpected visitor, a man in his 30s, glasses, suit, briefcase full of papers. Introduced himself as Dr. Michael Richardson, military historian, researching German reconnaissance losses in Italy. "I found a pattern," Richardson explained in Tommy's small office at the shop. "Unexplained vehicle rollovers in early 1944, casino sector specifically. Interviewed veterans. Your name kept coming up." Tommy leaned back in his chair. 50 years of working with his hands had left him with weathered skin and permanent grease under his fingernails. He looked at this young professor with his clean hands and earnest face. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. The method, the results, why it wasn't documented officially." Tommy told him. 2 hours of explanation, technical details, statistics he'd never forgotten, names of men who died, names of men who'd lived because of wire and shovels. Richardson took notes frantically. "This is incredible. This revolutionized anti-reconnaissance warfare. Your name should be in every military history textbook." "One condition," Tommy said. "What's that?" "Don't use my name in the publication." Richardson stopped writing. "Mr. Carson, you saved hundreds of lives, changed military doctrine. You deserve recognition." Tommy shook his head. "I deserve to go back to my shop and fix train couplers. My friend Eddie Novak deserved to come home and open this shop with me. Sergeant Riley deserved to see his sisters again. Santos deserved to see his mother." He met Richardson's eyes. "They didn't get what they deserved. I did. I got to come home. I got to build a life. That's enough recognition for me. But history should remember. History should remember it worked. Names don't matter. The soldiers who used the method, they know. The men whose lives were saved, they know. That's enough." Richardson published his article in 1965 in the Journal of Military History. Improvised Anti-Reconnaissance Tactics in Italian Campaign, 1944. Detailed analysis, statistical validation, technical specifications. Attribution, developed by unidentified NCOs, 34th Infantry Division. Tommy's name was never mentioned. March 11, 1987. Tommy was 62 years old. Still working part-time at the shop, still fixing couplers, still honoring Eddie's memory with every repair. Heart attack in his living room. Sudden. Massive. Dorothy called the ambulance, but Tommy knew. Recognized the feeling. The pain radiating down his arm. The pressure in his chest. The sense of time running out. He died on March 12th. Anniversary of the first wire flip. 43 years to the day. Last words while holding Dorothy's hand. "Tell Eddie I kept the promise. The shop has his name." Dorothy didn't understand. Never knew about Eddie Novak. Never knew about the wire. Never knew about the hundreds of lives saved by her husband's innovation. Tommy died with secrets. Died with memories. Died with a legacy he'd refused to claim. The obituary in the Gary Post-Tribune was 4 paragraphs. Thomas Carson, 62, rail yard worker and BW-20 veteran. Served with distinction in U.S. Army during World War II, stationed in Italy with 34th Infantry Division. Worked 41 years for U.S. Steel and Carson and Novak Rail Services. Survived by wife Dorothy, 3 children, 6 grandchildren. No mention of tripwires, no mention of scout cars, no mention of the Novak method or the lives saved. The funeral was attended by 70 people. Dorothy and the children and grandchildren, friends from the rail yards, customers from the shop, but also Danny Foster, who flew in from Arizona. Captain Hayes, now retired and gray, from Virginia. A dozen other men Tommy had trained. They showed up without being asked, stood in the back during the service, didn't say much. After the burial, Foster approached Dorothy. "Your husband saved my life. Probably saved it a dozen times. Just wanted you to know that." Dorothy nodded. "He never talked about it. He wouldn't have. That was Tommy. Did the work. Came home. Never asked for credit." The method Tommy invented outlived him. In 1949, Army engineers validated the concept. Wire obstacles at axle height were integrated into official doctrine as approved method for disabling light reconnaissance vehicles. Training manual credited. Field observations from Italian campaign. No names mentioned. Modern military forces still teach variations. IED countermeasures include wire-based vehicle traps. The principle hasn't changed. Simple solutions often beat complex ones. The method is taught worldwide. Some manuals call it the Carson method, others the Novak method. Neither name connected to actual people, just techniques in a manual, just tactics that work. But the real numbers tell the story that matters. 43 vehicles destroyed, 300 to 400 lives saved. Those soldiers had families, had children, had grandchildren. Entire family trees exist because of wire and shovels. In 2024, 80 years after that March morning in Italy, Tommy's grandson Michael works as an engineer in Chicago. Knows his grandfather served in World War II, knows he worked the rail yards, knows he ran a repair shop, doesn't know his grandfather changed warfare, doesn't know about the innovation, doesn't know about the lives saved. Found an old photograph once while cleaning out Dorothy's house after she passed. Grandpa in uniform, young, serious, looking at the camera like he could see the future. Michael kept the photograph, put it on his desk. Never knew the story behind it. The forgotten hero. No monument, no memorial. Name in no history books except as footnote in Richardson's article that almost no one reads. But the method he invented saved hundreds in 1944, saved thousands since, still taught, still used, still working. Sometimes the greatest innovations come from people not supposed to have them. Sometimes the system would rather forget than admit it was wrong. Sometimes the heroes are the ones who go home quietly, who fix couplers and honor dead friends and never ask for credit. Tommy Carson understood something that most people never learn. That glory is empty, that recognition is fleeting, that the only thing that matters is whether you did the work that needed doing. He broke the rules because the rules were killing people. He created something new because the old ways weren't working. He saved lives because that was more important than following orders. And when offered recognition, he said no, because the method mattered more than his name, because his friend Eddie deserved the credit more than he did, because going home and living a quiet life was worth more than any medal. That's the real American story, not the generals, not the politicians, Not the men who take credit and collect awards, the corporals who see problems and fix them, the rail yard workers who understand physics better than engineers, the ordinary men who do extraordinary things and then go home like nothing happened. Tommy Carson's legacy isn't in the medals he never received, isn't in the history books that never mentioned his name, isn't in the recognition he refused. It's in the wires stretched across roads in a dozen different wars, in the soldiers who learned the method and taught it to others, in the families who stayed whole because a scout car flipped instead of completing its mission, in the 300 to 400 men who came home from Italy instead of dying there, who married and had children and built lives because a 19-year-old corporal from Gary, Indiana decided that saving lives mattered more than following orders. That's worth more than any medal, worth more than any monument, worth more than having your name in history books. Tommy kept his promise to Eddie, did the work, came home, opened the shop with Eddie's name on it, and maybe that's exactly right. Maybe the best heroes are the ones who don't need recognition, who do what needs doing and then move on, who carry their dead friends in their hearts instead of on their uniforms. The Wire still teaches that innovation comes from unexpected places, that rules aren't sacred when they cost lives, that sometimes the simplest solution is the best one, that doing the right thing matters more than doing the approved thing, that saving lives matters more than saving face, that ordinary people can change the world if they're willing to take the risk. Tommy Carson took the risk, broke the rules, saved hundreds of lives, refused recognition, then went home and lived the life Eddie Novak never got to live, kept the promise, honored the dead by living well. And in the end, that's the only legacy that matters. The Wire still works. The method still saves lives. The story still teaches. Even if most people never know the name of the man who started it all,